Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 5 quarterback start or sit decisions for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, I'm going to be going in depth into every single matchup from Thursday Night Football all the way until Monday Night Football, and I'll be telling you guys whether I believe you should start or sit the quarterbacks in every single matchup. But before we get into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to my channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below, and while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure to hit that like button. It helps boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I'd also like to ask, if you guys are on Twitter and would like to follow me, to please do so at Notorious FNTSY. The link to my Twitter is also down below in the description. So without further ado, let's get into the video. We begin with Thursday Night Football between the LA Rams at the Seattle Seahawks. This is going to be a very interesting Thursday Night Football game, as I feel like both of these teams have the chance to put up a big point total on each other. The LA Rams last week didn't look all that great up against the Arizona Cardinals, but if I'm being honest with you guys, I will put a lot of that blame not on Matthew Stafford and instead kind of shift the blame to Sean McVay, because Sean McVay, instead of going for it on crucial fourth down scenarios, he just elected to kick the field goal. He kind of tried to make the safer play instead of really trying to put the pedal to the fucking metal and put some big points up on the Arizona Cardinals, and that was ultimately a bad decision to kick all those field goals because they fell very far behind the Arizona Cardinals in this game up against the Seattle Seahawks. I really do believe this is going to be a very heavy back and forth affair between two offenses that are going to be beating each other down. I expect Matthew Stafford as well as Russell Wilson to have great games. Cooper Kupp obviously had a downswing last week, which is kind of predictable that eventually a guy who's basically a top 5 wide receiver every single week is going to have at least one down game on the season. I expect Cooper Kupp to have a much better game this week up against the Seattle defense. I also expect Robert Woods, who Sean McVay has been kind of fluffing up, talking up for the past week as to him wanting to get Matthew Stafford to throw the ball more to Robert Woods, get Robert Woods more involved in the offense. So hopefully Robert Woods could have a bigger game, because I understand that everyone who drafted him has been immensely disappointed with the production that Robert Woods has been having thus far this season. So I think Matthew Stafford has a great game. For the Seattle Seahawks, it doesn't really matter if Chris Carson is healthy or not in terms on how well Russell Wilson will play. Now, obviously, Chris Carson is a valuable piece to this offense, and right now, based upon everything that I have seen after making the running back video, it seems as though Chris Carson is likely to not end up playing tomorrow on Thursday night. With that said, I still think Alex Collins fills the role just enough for Russell Wilson to have a perfectly fine game. I expect him to air it out a decent amount up against this Rams defense, because I do believe this will be a back and forth affair between two excellent offenses. So I like Stafford as well as Russell Wilson on the week. Next up, we move to the Sunday morning game, the New York Football Jets at the Atlanta Falcons in London. In this game, I'm going to be firing up Mr. Matt Ryan. Matty Ice Ice Baby looked really good last week up against the Washington football team. Now, they ultimately did choke that game in the Atlanta Falcons fashion, as they always choke the games, but Matt Ryan is starting to really look like his prior self, not starting to look like the Matt Ryan that we saw in week number 1 and week number 2, where he looked like a shell of himself. Cordero Patterson is clearly a focal point in this offense. Now, I like Calvin Ridley in this game, but Cordero Patterson, for some reason, is just the fairy tale story of this season. He is seeing so much work in this Atlanta Falcons offense, and it's really helping out Matt Ryan a ton. Going up against a bad Jumbo Jets defense, I expect Matt Ryan to put up a good game. Despite Ryan Tannehill not looking all that great up against the Jets, you could really attribute that to the fact that A.J. Brown as well as Julio Jones did not play in that game. Otherwise, Ryan Tannehill probably would have smothered that Jets defense, so I think Matt Ryan has a big game this week. For the Jumbo Jets, I'm going to be sitting down Zach Wilson. I just don't know how much you can trust Zach Wilson at this point. Now, he had played well in week number 1 of the season up against the Panthers, and then after that, he was on a downward spiral. And then last week, in that game that they ended up winning up against the Tennessee Titans, he played relatively well. So which Zach Wilson will we see? The one who really struggled in week 2 and 3, or the Zach Wilson that looked relatively solid in the second half of the week 1 game, as well as in the game up against the Tennessee Titans? I'm just not sure. If we can see some consistency out of Zach Wilson on a week-to-week standpoint, then maybe in the future, Zach Wilson will be a quarterback that I'm looking to start. I understand that this is a good matchup. I'm just not sure that Zach Wilson will be able to get it done in this game in London. Next up, we move to the beginning of the Sunday 1 o'clock slate, the Detroit Lions at the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Mr. You Like That Kirk Cousins was a humongous disappointment last week. I was really banging the drum for the Minnesota Vikings and the Cleveland Browns game to be a relatively high-scoring game. I thought Odell Beckham Jr. would have a good game because Baker Mayfield was going to have to throw the ball more because this was going to be a high-scoring affair, when in reality, this was a very defensive and run-based game. Now, this week, they go up against the Detroit Lions. Kirk Cousins and the Vikings should absolutely shellac that defense, so I expect Kirk Cousins to have a big game. Jared Goff could obviously have a solid game here going up against the Minnesota Vikings because this could be a high-scoring game if the Detroit Lions are able to kind of play catch-up and are able to throw deeper on into the game. But will that be the case? Because Jared Goff really hasn't looked all that great this season. Now, again, I think a lot of the jokes cracked at Jared Goff are kind of incorrect because Jared Goff is far from an atrocious quarterback, far from an awful quarterback. But at the end of the day, going up against the Vikings defense, who looked really good up against the Cleveland Browns, I just don't expect Jared Goff to be able to get too much done in this matchup. Next up, we got the New Orleans Saints at the Washington Football Team. Now, I've talked about this in a lot of videos over the last couple of weeks, but the Washington Football Team defense has been a complete and utter unmitigated fucking disaster. Everyone expects the Washington Football Team defense in the offseason to look how they looked last year, to be one of the top defenses in the NFL, for Chase Young to look amazing, for this whole defensive unit to be one of the best in the NFL, and it's just not happening right now. The Washington Football Team defense is getting plowed game in and game out. Would it surprise me if Jameis Winston chucked 5 touchdowns in this game up against the Washington Football Team? Of course not. But there is still the worry that Taysom Hill is going to be put into the game because that has happened at multiple times in this season. It seems like Sean Payton doesn't want Jameis Winston to do Jameis Winston things. He doesn't want Jameis Winston to just uncork a piss missile 1,000 yards down the field and try to have one of the wide receivers go get it. It seems like they're trying to play a very safe version of football that involves handing the ball to Alvin Kamara a million times instead of having Alvin Kamara run some routes and having Jameis throw him the ball. So they're kind of playing a safe version of football. They're kind of babyifying this offense, simplifying this offense for famous Jameis Winston, which, while maybe working, doesn't help us at all in fantasy football when we're used to a guy who is going to be throwing the ball 7 million times a game in Jameis Winston. So at the end of the day, every single week, Jameis Winston is a huge risk. If you have balls the size of those red balls that are in front of fucking Target, then go ahead and play Jameis Winston because you can take the risk, because there is a solid chance that he just throws 3-4 touchdowns up against the Washington Football Team. But there's also a chance that Alvin Kamara runs into, that Taysom Hill gets into the game, runs in a touchdown himself, and then maybe Jameis Winston doesn't score at all, and you are left very disappointed. So I'm sitting down Jameis Winston this week, even though this is a great matchup up against the football team. For the Washington Football Team, I'm firing up Taylor Heinicke. Now, this Saints defense is on a fucking roller coaster ride all season. Week 1, they look amazing up against the Green Bay Packers. Week number 2, Mono Man Sam eviscerates that defense. Week number 3, up against the New England Patriots, they look great again. And then in week number 4, up against the New York Football Giants, they absolutely fold. So which defense are we going to see? I have no idea. Taylor Heinicke, though, did show me a lot last week up against the Atlanta Falcons. I like Taylor Heinicke a lot. He has a lot of decent weapons around him, so I think he has a great day, even without Logan Thomas. Next up, we move to the New England Patriots at the Houston Texans. In this game, I know a lot of people are going to be clamoring for Mac Jones. They are going to be very excited to throw Mac Jones into their lineup, but I want to tell you guys to just cool down a little bit on Mac Jones. While the Patriots should easily butt-fuck the Houston Texans defense, there is still the chance that this game is a lot like what it was for the Patriots up against the Jets when the Jets were struggling mightily. Mac Jones has a good game as a real-life quarterback, right? He doesn't make very many mistakes. He's not throwing any interceptions. He is making it so the Patriots could just coast through this game by running the ball, dumping the ball off a little, and dripping time off the clock. Now, last week, we saw Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills uncork on the Houston Texans, dropping 40 points, letting the Texans offense score 0. Now, while that could happen, while magically Bill Belichick could wake up, feel fucking pissed off that he lost to Tom Brady, and just let Mac Jones cook and eviscerate the Houston Texans defense. But I project this to be a lot more like that Jets game, where the New England Patriots are up, they're running the ball, they're doing these short plays, they're basically making it so that Mac Jones can't fuck up the game and throw any interceptions, so they're just going to try to keep it safe. And I believe that's what's going to happen. And a lot of people are going to be all in on Mac Jones because he plays the Texans. This should be an easy game for him. And I agree, it should be an easy game. But if he doesn't score 2 touchdowns, then you are going to be immensely disappointed in Mac Jones because he has virtually no rushing upside. For the Texans, Davis Mills is going to be a sit for me. That man may have a longer neck than a fucking giraffe. But at the end of the day, the size of your neck, the length of your neck is not going to help you win a football game. And that has been proven by Davis Mills as well as by Mike Glennon. Next up, we move to my Miami Dolphins at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But before we get on into the in-depth breakdown of this game at the quarterback position, I would like to ask if you have ended up enjoying thus far to please make sure that you do hit that like button down below, as well as hitting that subscribe button down below. It helps me out a ton. So when it comes to Tampa Bay, Tom Brady, I expect him to have an explosive day all over this Dolphins defense. Now, the Dolphins defense is good up against the pass, but realistically, we'll probably see what happened last week up against the Indianapolis Colts, where the Dolphins defense looks all right up against the pass, looks terrible up against the run. But eventually, they just break. Eventually, they just give up because the Dolphins offense, I expect to do virtually nothing up against the Buccaneers. So Tom Brady's going to be a start. Maybe at the beginning of the game, he starts it off slow, but in the second half, he is going to uncork on this Dolphins defense, as I believe the defense will give up. For the Dolphins, there is no way you could start Jacoby Brissett. I really pumped up the revenge game narrative up against the Colts. I thought the Colts defense was shit. It turns out that they might be bad, but Jacoby Brissett is even worse. Jacoby Brissett could not read that defense. It looked like he couldn't even read a fucking children's book, a Dr. Seuss book out there. It was embarrassing. Jacoby Brissett stinks. Do not start him this week up against the Buccaneers defense. Next up, we got the Packers at the Cincinnati Bengals. In this one, I like Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers could easily put up one of the best fantasy performances of the week at the quarterback position up against this Bengals defense. The Bengals defense was a huge disappointment of mine last week going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. While they looked a lot sharper at the end of the game, at the beginning, they were just getting plowed by Trevor Lawrence and Urban Meyer's offense. I believe that Aaron Rodgers should be able to have a huge week this week up against the Bengals, and if the Bengals are able to kind of catch up and play with them and maybe get a nice back and forth affair between these two teams, Joe Burrow should be able to have a solid game. Joe Burrow does definitely have some rushing upside as well in this matchup. Joe Burrow's wide receivers are likely all going to play in this game, that being Jamar Chase, as well as Mr. T. Higgins, who hopefully returns this week, as well as Tyler Boyd. Sadly, they will be without Joe Mixon, but it's okay because Samaje Perine isn't completely awful. I still think Joe Burrow will have a solid game, but he's far from a upper echelon start, in my opinion, on the week. Next up, we got the Broncos at the Pittsburgh Steelers. In this one, I'm sitting down both Horsecock Drew Lock, as well as if Teddy Two Gloves, Teddy Bridgewater is able to play in this game, then I'm sitting him as well because the Steelers defense just scares me. If Drew Lock plays, he's the kind of quarterback, he's a lot like Jameis Winston, where I wouldn't be surprised if Lock hung 4 touchdowns on the Steelers. Now, the Steelers have an excellent defense, so the odds that are going to that is going to actually happen is very unlikely. But there is always the chance that Drew Lock ends up getting locked in, that Drew Lock ends up playing very well and just slices and dices through the Steelers. He is a very momentum-based quarterback. If Drew Lock is able to get it up, and he's able to get it up massive Viagra style, and he's rock solid in that game, then he is going to tear through the Steelers. But if maybe he starts off sluggish, he starts off slow, then we'll likely be on a path directly to the bottom for Drew Lock on the week. So I do not expect him to have all that great of a game. So he'll be a sit for me. And even if Teddy Two Gloves plays, this is a tough matchup up against the Steelers. The Broncos defense is relatively solid as well, but that's not even why I would sit down Big Ben. I'm going to be sitting down Big Ben because the guy absolutely fucking stinks. I do believe eventually this season, maybe he will look a little bit better when he's not hurt, but he has that pec injury, he has this hip injury, but he just has so many things going against him right now. All the injuries, mix that with the fact that he just hasn't looked good this season. I don't really expect him to break out of that kind of slump, out of that funk right now this week up against the Denver Broncos. I just expect this to be a bad game all around. Next up, we got the Philadelphia Eagles at the Carolina Panthers. In this matchup, I like both quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts has that rushing floor every single week, but you know who else has that insane rushing floor? Mono man Sam Darnold, the leader in the NFL in rushing touchdowns. Sam Darnold threw Adam Gase off of him like Derrick Henry when he stiff-armed Josh Norman, and it's a new mono man Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold has been off the chain, as the kids say these days. Sam Darnold is on fire. Sam Darnold is amazing. This Eagles defense, you cannot use any of those words. For them, maybe the fire, but it's more of a dumpster fire. This Eagles defense isn't that, well, maybe that's a little too far, right? Because the Eagles defense isn't awful. But what I'm saying is Sam Darnold has been playing very well, even up against tough defensive matchups like last week up against the Cowboys. While they lost that game, Darnold still looked good, so I expect him to look good up against the Philadelphia Eagles. Jalen Hurts does have that rushing upside as well. He looked really good last week up against the Kansas City Chiefs. This could be a high-scoring game, so I do like Jalen Hurts a lot in this matchup. I like him every single week because, again, even in a bad matchup, he's just going to rush the ball enough to kind of mitigate maybe an interception that he throws, or maybe the fact that he doesn't have a big day through the air. Next up, we move to the Tennessee Titans at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I'm going to tell you to start Trevor Lawrence, but this is like a bottom of the barrel level start. This is like, man, it's like a break. You know when you break the glass in the movies, then there's like the emergency button? The emergency button is Trevor Lawrence, because in these games, at least as of recently, the Tennessee Titans have went to Pound Town up against Duval and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence looked pretty good last week, in my opinion. It looks like they're going to let him loose, let him run the ball. So I expect Trevor Lawrence to have an all right day, but as a top 10 quarterback, top 12 quarterback, I just don't really see that being in the cards for Trevor Lawrence on the week. Even if the Titans defense isn't very good, typically they just roll the Jags. I expect Ryan Tannehill to bounce back as long as one of A.J. Brown or Julio Jones plays. If neither of them plays, just fire up Derrick Henry, because we all know it's Derrick Henry week up against the Jaguars. He always rushes for so many yards. I read off the stats in the video from earlier. He's played in 10 games up against the Jaguars in his career and has rushed for over 1,000 yards. 1,000 yards in those games total. That's just crazy. He's going to run a train on the Jaguars defense. Next up, we got the Browns at the LA Chargers. In this one, I like Justin Herbert, the pervert, and I'm going to be sitting down Mr. Baker Mayfield. Now, Baker Mayfield looked so off in that game last week up against the Minnesota Vikings. He had Odell wide open. Probably would have been like a 60, 70-ish yard touchdown. Maybe that's a little ambitious. Maybe like a 50-yard touchdown. But Odell was butt naked wide open. There was no way that Baker should have missed that. He missed through the ball. And that wasn't the only time during the game. Now, I can't think of another exact example, but he just didn't look like he was 100% accurate in that game, that he wasn't 100% on. Now, could he turn things around 100%? But up against this stout Chargers defense, I don't really expect that. The Cleveland Browns MO, their kind of strategy to win games this season and last season as well, is just by running the rock. Run the ball aggressively with 9-inch Nicholas Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and that obviously hurts Baker Mayfield because he's the quarterback. He doesn't get any points for handing the ball off to Chubb and Kareem Hunt. For the Chargers, like I said, Justin Herbert, the pervert, he's a must-start quarterback every single week, even going up against a stout Cleveland defense who just held down Mr. You Like That Kirk Cousins last week. I expect Herbert to have a great game. Next up, we got the Bears at the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, Derek Carr had a very down game up against the LA Chargers defense, but I expect things to be a lot different here up against the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears are a lot like the Washington football team defensively, where a lot of people really liked the Washington football team defense. A lot of people kind of have the memories of the last couple of years of the Chicago Bears. They're thinking about how ferocious, how excellent that defense has been for the last couple of years, but in reality, they're just a shell of that. The Chicago Bears defense isn't all that good, and I expect Derek Carr to have an excellent comeback game after playing very bad, at least in my opinion. Not very bad, but he missed a couple of throws, didn't look all that great up against the Chargers. Justin Fields is going to be a sit for me. Now, it's not because Justin Fields looked bad up against the Lions, but it's because this is a true test. Now, Bill Lazor is calling the plays, which is great for Fields. But let's see it up against a real defense, not up against the Lions. Let's see it up against the Raiders defense. Let's see it. Let's see them not just score the ball by running a million times. We need to see Justin Fields air it out, get a little bit loose, maybe run the ball a little bit himself, score some touchdowns, and then next week, I'll be over here clamoring for Justin Fields, but until we see that, I'm just not ready to fire him up into my lineup. Next game, we got the San Francisco 49ers at the Arizona Cardinals. Now, you might be thinking, oh, Nick, you just argued about how you need to see more out of Justin Fields before you can start him, but you have Trey Lance listed as a start. Don't you know he's also a rookie quarterback, you fucking idiot? I understand. He is also a rookie quarterback. But to me, Trey Lance proved it in preseason for me. He proved it in the times he's been in the regular season. And he proved it for me last week when Jimmy G-Spot, Jimmy Garoppolo went down. Trey Lance going up against the Cardinals. The Cardinals defense looked good up against the Rams. But again, I'm putting some of the blame on the Rams. They didn't really step on the gas. They were just kicking these field goals instead of trying to actually score some points. Put the 7s on the board instead of the 3s. Or put the 6s on the board, I guess, because then you got to kick the field goal. But you get what I'm, not the field goal, the extra point, but you get what I'm talking about. They were playing not aggressive. I believe the 49ers are going to play very aggressive. I believe they are going to install a new looking 49ers offense that is kind of cultivated for Trey Lance's playing style, where he's able to run the ball a lot more, where his offense looks a little bit different. I like Trey Lance in this game. There is definitely a risk with doing it, but I like him here. Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray, that's a must-start quarterback every single week. One of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and even up against a 49ers defense, I expect Murray to play very, very big. Next up, we got the Giants at the Dallas Cowboys in an NFC East grudge match. In this one, I'm starting Daniel Jones, but he's a lot like Trevor Lawrence, where it really is a bottom-of-the-barrel start. Because the Cowboys defense is good, something tells me that Daniel Jones is going to play really good in this game, and they're going to somehow beat the Cowboys, but that's just the NFC East games. I feel like you never have a really good tell on who is going to win, even if the Cowboys are like miles ahead of the Giants in skill on offense and on defense. Somehow they'll end up winning the game because that's just how things go. I like Daniel Jones a decent amount in this game because of the rushing upside he has. He looked really good up against the football team. Let's see it up against the Cowboys, but if you are in a deeper league or if you're at the bottom of the barrel, you can start Daniel Jones. Dak, he's an insta start every single week. Going up against the Giants defense should be no issue for Mr. Dakota Prescott. Next up, we have the Bills at the Kansas City Chiefs for Sunday Night Football in Kansas City. In this game, I like Josh Allen and I like Patrick Mahomes. Last time these two teams played, Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills got rolled by the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes hung a big game on them on their way to the Super Bowl, where they ultimately lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, these are the quarterbacks that got drafted very early on in your fantasy league. But again, we're so far past the draft that shouldn't really affect your mindset, but it does at the quarterback position, especially when they're the names of Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. You're going to start those guys every single week. Doesn't matter the defense that they're playing up against, you're going to fire them out. Josh Allen going up against a Chiefs defense that looks relatively solid. The Bills defense looks really good thus far this season. This should be an interesting game. This should be a high-scoring game between two of the best offenses, if not the best offenses in the National Football League. And final game here, we got the Indianapolis Colts at the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are slated to play 5 primetime games this year, which is the maximum that you can play. It feels like they've already played 3. This has to be their 3rd primetime game. It feels like I know the Ravens more than any team because I'm always just solely focused on them because they get these night primetime games. Here up against the Indianapolis Colts, this is going to be a murder. The Colts actually stink. The Dolphins are just way worse. Somehow they lose the game. The Colts stand no chance up against the Ravens. Lamar Jackson could be the #1 quarterback on the week. Carson Wentz looked pretty solid up against the Dolphins, but I don't expect that shit to work up against the Ravens, so I expect Carson Wentz to be completely shut down in this matchup. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you do hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hitting that like button down below. I would appreciate it a ton. I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video in the morning. Tomorrow is Thursday, so we got Thursday Night Football, and I will be live right before the game, I think around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, discussing your guys' questions, answering your guys' questions, so that we can build the best lineups to dominate in week number 5 of the 2021 fantasy football season. I love you guys so much. I hope you have a great rest of your guys' day, and as always, goodbye!